pace being reduced today, I'm hoping to give you a little suspension story time. So for this story, you gotta go all the way back to when I got this suspension a few years ago. And when I got it, I had Kendall from K-Tech USA Triple T suspension. I bought it used, so he refreshed it for me, sprung it properly for my weight at the time, and got her all set up. Felt fucking amazing. I know you're not supposed to cuss in the first 30 seconds of the video, but it'd be what it be, because it was incredible. Boost Rebel. That being said, had a big crash in Road Atlanta, you know, I would say almost a year after I got the suspension, which is on the channel. You can't see the crash because my camera quit, but you can see the aftermath of the crash. And that being said, the tore up my suspension. I had a bent lower stanchion where the brake mounts to the where the brake caliper mounts to the fork. I had a damaged fork cap, and so because I couldn't get it back up to Triple T, to Kendall at the time, I decided to take it to a guy who was a little bit closer to me, who, in his defense, normally does incredible work. He's highly rated. He's a K-Tech guy. He's an Ohlins guy. He does a lot of race suspension. That front end does feel good. So I took it to him. Had him pull the cartridges out of the old tube. Kind of put the cartridges into some new spare tubes that I bought. And we got a new cap. Lots of stuff like that. And yeah, like it was fine. And the bike rode well. I asked him to maintain the settings, because Kendall from K-Tech USA and Triple T is kind enough. He sends you an entire spec card on your setup, makes everything nice and easy for you. And so I asked the guy who I took him to, who's going to remain unnamed until I get a chance to speak with him, because I'm sure this was a mistake. I don't think he intentionally did this. I just wish I would have known more at the time. So, you know, sent him the spec cards, which include all the settings, the oil level, everything. And when I went to go have my suspension refreshed this spring at the Moto America round at Road Atlanta, which was absolutely incredible. Got to watch Kayla Yakov put it on the pole for Super Sport. 2 seconds here, folks. Yeah, that front end feels good. Oh, sorry, one part of the story that we missed here. So the bike, after the big crash, the bike had to be verified that the frame was straight. And so we had, right after I had the suspension refreshed by said guy who we're complaining about today, local guy, more local guy I should say. He's got a great reputation in the track community. We set the fork height to where I thought it should be, and took it to a place called the Compton Track. They laser measured the frame and a whole bunch of different bits and bobs, and they verified that it was straight, and they checked my setup numbers, and we did not do a process that you pay for called geometry optimization, which is where they set your geometry for you on what the math says, and the Moto America history says that not just Moto America, the racing history across the world, because GMG is a worldwide company. But they set your geometry based on the numbers that should be, ideal, and then you kind of dial from there based on personal feel preference. So I didn't pay the extra money for that. I was a broke boy at the time and trying to put back together my motorcycle. And so we just had them verify everything was straight, and they gave me what we call my current setup numbers. Which, if you don't know, and most people don't, I didn't before having this process done a couple years ago, front fork height is not measured off the top of the clamp. For those of you who pay and are really, really detail-oriented, pay close attention to my videos, you may notice that my forks went from sitting down in the clamp, up in the clamp, being almost flush for the last year and a half, but now they're set back with a little bit of a gap kept sticking up. And that is because fork height, or ride height, is measured from the top of the lower triple clamp down the fork to the center of the axle. And that is what actually provides you consistent information on the geometry of the motorcycle, how far tip forward it is, what the braking trail numbers actually look like, all that happy stuff that comes along with being able to control the motorcycle and the way it feels, especially the front end feels. Your rear shock affects your swing arm angle and also affects your raking trail numbers, but doesn't affect your ride height. Very important distinction. So I learned at the time, right? So, to make a long story short, we got the ride height numbers from them, and after having the forks refreshed at the K-Tech USA table at Moto America with Kendall, Birch Wadewitz, and the suspension tech that actually worked on my bike, I feel terrible, man, if you're watching this. I don't think you will be, but if you're watching this, I'm so sorry. I struggle with names. That guy was really upset at us. But he was amazing. He was super informative, super kind. Like, cannot say enough good things about him. He's teaching me a ton of stuff, man. So big shout out to you, dog. I wish I remembered your name. I was trying to think of it. But that being said, so we learned that the forks had a little bit of stiction in them while we were there, and that I was missing the spacer that sits up under the oil seal. Some of us are going to call it a washer, but it's a little curved lip spacer that sits up under the oil seal, in between the outer fork body and the oil seal. You've got the outer fork body, you've got the spacer, you've got the oil seal, you've got your lock ring or retention ring, like the clip, and then you've got your dust seal that sits on top of that. So it's missing one of those on one side. Not a huge deal, but that's probably why the one side of the fork was starting to give up sooner than the other. And then was noticing some differences when I was putting it back together. My forks were 10 millimeters longer. Meaning at the same ride height, I now had 10 and 11 respectively millimeters sticking out the top of the tubes, because with manufacturing differences, one tube is always slightly longer or shorter than the other. And so I started calling the guys over at K-Tech, being like, did you guys change my settings, and what happened? And for reference, when I get a set of forks back from a race shop, typically I don't double check, and that's my fault. I have to start doing that. With that being said, he started reading off my settings to me, and I had, this time, had double checked them just to make sure, because I knew how busy they were that weekend. I mean, hell, it's Moto America round. So, with all that said, they were like, nope, these are the settings that we pulled off the bike. They match exactly what you're telling us, that you found in the bike. And so the only person who could have set those new settings instead of using my spec cards was the guy from a couple of years ago that did my tube swap. And in talking with Birch, I come to find out the fork almost had no oil in the pressurized cartridge. For reference, I run a K-Tech DDS front fork cartridge and a DDS Pro hydraulic preload adjuster rear shock on this bike, and they're incredible. And in the local guy's defense, they rode pretty well with the new settings and the less oil. But in conversation, not only were we missing a spacer, the pressurized portion of the fork, or the fork itself, didn't have the correct oil level in it. After reaching out to him directly and asking him, he had changed my air gap in the forks to accommodate for some of this. And he didn't say to accommodate, but he had changed the air gap in the fork by 15 millimeters. And with all that being said, they rode decent, they rode well. I had to make some preload adjustments in the rear shock to accommodate for some of the changes. But other than that, it's like, the bike rode well. He could track the bike with these forks and these settings. So, my bigger complaint is not that it felt like shit, but just that they weren't right. And like, maybe you didn't notice that you couldn't do it right. I don't know what happened, but needless to say, I'd like to get a chance to talk with him. The guy's got a great reputation in the community. I don't want to cook him just over a YouTube video and a mistake. but it sounds like it was a couple mistakes on each piece of the equipment that he touched, and that's what worries me. Especially because I know he advertises that he not only sells K-Tech, but that he does service on a lot of K-Tech stuff. And I don't want anybody to be in the same shoes that I was in back when all that happened. So, that being said, if I'm able to get another track day this year, we'll be chatting with him, trying to figure out what went on, letting him know, you know, we had a lack of oil in the shock causing the preload numbers to be completely different. So normally on a K-Tech shock, there's 10 millimeters of preload from the hydraulic preload adjuster at the 0 point on the shock adjuster to keep the spring from rattling around, because it's got a top out spring as well. So there's overlap essentially. And then in the forks, it sounds like he put more oil in the outer portion but less oil in the pressurized part of the fork and added preload. Good spot, sir. And added preload to compensate for whatever was going on in the pressurized cartridge section of the fork. And I hope I'm saying that right. You know, I could be saying it wrong. I know I was told there was barely, and I'm quoting here, there was barely any oil in the forks. And that's scary, you know? Like, that's scary to think about. So missing parts, underfilled shock, underfilled forks. But that being said, Birch, Kendall, and the gentleman out of the DC area who does incredible work and actually had his hands on my forks, you guys kick ass. You're informative, detailed, you do things the right way, and I can feel it today. This is her maiden voyage. Yep, thank you, sir. Ooh, that's dirty. Dirty, dirty, dirty. I can feel it today. And we might be making a few slight adjustments because I've put on a little bit of weight since the very first time I had these set up. But needless to say, now that they're built correctly, we went all the way back to like the 2023 settings that Kendall had initially put me on, that I thought felt amazing, that got me to advanced group, that made me just love this K-Tech suspension. And I think we're going to get a more dialed gear, y'all. So, with that being said, we're going to enjoy the rest of this ride. We're almost to the Country Stowe. And, yeah, thank you for the TED Talk. Thanks for listening to the TED Talk. Properly. The rear shock squats, I don't wheelie as bad on heavy throttle. Like, I am going to be faster with these settings. There is no doubt in my mind. And the bike already feels incredible. Already. Just after our little jog. So, we're not going to go much faster than that today. We're trying to be responsible, more responsible with our street riding, but thanks for listening to my TED Talk.